Hello, hello, hello. Let's get everyone into the room. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So wonderful to have you. And I had an interesting conversation today. I was having a meeting with someone in London. And I said, "Oh, I'm sure the weather is better." And just for the record, if you ever talk to English people, you always start with the weather. And I said to him, "Well, I'm sure you guys have better weather in England right now. You're kind of going into spring, summer, etc. And it's really cold here. It's really beautiful and sunny, but it's really cold." And he said to me, "It's 13 degrees." And I was like, "What?" So actually, as it turns out, in the middle of our winter, when it is freezing here for me, it was warmer here and sunnier here. So always interesting for me. Always reminds me of why I came home, to be honest. But what I'm super excited to share with you is I want to share with you and invite a very special guest. Let me share the screen. I'll talk a little bit about Simon, and then I'll welcome him into the room. And let me share my screen with you quickly. So this is Simon Zutshi. Him and I have known each other for a very long time. And believe it or not, it's actually been 20 years. So the reason or how we met was in Birmingham. I don't even remember. It might have been Simon's event. I can't remember. But we were both invited to speak in Birmingham. So I'd started a company, International Property Solutions, in 2004. It's been going 21 years now. And I went on train up to Birmingham. And I was actually presenting on South Africa and the benefits of investing in South African property. And I assume Simon was, telling everyone about investing in English property. Anyway, we met then. So it's literally 20 years ago. We've obviously crossed shoulders and crossed paths many, many times, having been in the property industry for 20 odd years plus. But what I've always found really fascinating with Simon is he started a network, which I'll let him tell you more about, called the Property Investor Network, which is the biggest property investor network in England. And I've always been fascinated by that because it's achieved three things. The first is that it's made him one of the market leaders in terms of just what's going on in England, what's happening in the UK property market. He always has to keep his finger on the pulse, obviously, as the leader and founder of the Property Investor Network. The second thing that's fascinating is that they've got all of these chapters in all these cities all around England. And because he's part of that and he's running these masterminds and meeting all the leaders and everything else, he truly has his finger in so many different pies, and he has information that's coming from grassroots level that often is far more powerful than what you're reading in the press or even in the data. So that's the second thing. And the third thing that I find most interesting is that it also allows him to be at the forefront of new technology and new ideas and new ways to do things. And one of the things I love about working with Simon is that he's always been someone who's prepared to go out and try new things. And so a good example of that was him and I were both being coached by a guy called Roger Hamilton. And Roger was like, "Hey, technology is going to change the property industry." And I actually don't even remember if Simon and I spoke about this. I don't think we did. I don't remember having a conversation. But anyway, he went off and he built a company called Crowd Property, which is a highly successful platform out of England. We went off and built Wealth Migrate almost at the same time, like literally 2013. And yeah, 12 years later, they both, two of the market leaders in terms of where they're at. The difference between the two is the Crowd Property does debt and Wealth Migrate does debt and equity. But what is important is that Simon actually gave a presentation to our mastermind members. And I was just looking, Simon, it was in November 2023. Can you believe it was that long ago?
Wow.
And it was teaching people how one can take, advantage of debt. It's one of the fastest growing asset classes in England. And Simon was teaching our mastermind members how one could participate in this. Now, fast forward again, and Simon gets hold of me and says, "Hey, Scott, we're evolving a new way of investing in England because one of the challenges with investing, we all know this, is if you buy a house and you've got to renovate it and manage it and look after the tenants and collect the rent and everything in between." Anyway, I'm not going to steal Simon's thunder, but one of the things that I do enjoy is that when you're dealing with someone that's been in the game for decades, they have the ability to look at new ways of doing things, but also understanding what the fundamentals are of investing. You're not dealing with two 20-year-olds that are coming up with a good idea in a garage. You're coming up with seasoned investors that are saying, what are the pros of property? What are the challenges of these property? How can we mitigate the challenges, enhance the pros? And so without further ado, Simon, I wanted to welcome you. It's always an honor and a privilege to share the stage with you. And for our members and our guests that are here, wherever people are in the world, I'll ask everyone to tell us where they are in the world now. But for me, what's so important is that what I love about talking with you as well is it allows us to get a pulse of what's happening on the ground, what are the innovative ways to invest. And if I'm ever going to invest, everyone knows this. There's two things I'm looking for. the right information. And if there's one person in England in the property market, I actually don't know anyone that's more connected than you are. And the second is the right partners. And having walked a journey with you for 20 years, spent a week with you on Necker Island, we've had a lot of fun together. We've done, a lot of business together. I really trust what you do and who you are as a person. And so I'm super grateful to have you here and very, very excited to share with everyone what you're going to share tonight. But with that, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thanks for a wonderful introduction there. And, as you said, we've both been innovators in our own ways over the years. There was no networking in the UK for investors before I started Property Investors Network. My book, Property Magic, first came out in 2008, the first book to talk about how you can literally buy with no money down in the UK, what we were doing then. Crowd Property in 2013, and you went down the equity and debt, I went down to just the debt route. Crowd Property, I have a team running that for me now, but we've lent something like £800 million over the last 13 years, which is pretty incredible, really.
Just to put in perspective, like £800 million. So what that means is that Jill or Joe Soap has wanted to borrow money, and basically Simon has created a bank that lends money for property, and then people make money within property. But £800 million is a significant amount.
Sorry, I'm misquoting myself there. It's £800 million of GDV, gross development value.
Okay.
The actual loans about, 450 million. That's still quite a lot of money, right?
Oh, it's £500 million, just to put it in perspective.
Yeah, I'm just shy of £500 million. Yeah, absolutely. So I know a lot about lending and borrowing money. And as you quite rightly pointed, we lend to UK developers. And you know what? Developers have had a tough time over the last few years. First, we had COVID, which was completely out of the blue. That caused a massive impact on ability to actually work on sites. It caused a massive impact on cost of materials, labor as well. We had Brexit. A lot of people went back to Eastern Europe. So it's been tough to develop. And, there's risk associated with development. And that's partly where I've got to what I'm going to share tonight. And by the way, Scott, tonight for Wealth Migrate clients, this is the very first time I've shared this on a webinar like this. So this really is cutting edge, and we're just putting this together. And the timing happened to be that it was fortunate you guys the first, even before my own database.
Let's tell the real story, Simon. I love living up to our core value of transparency. So I came up to Birmingham. I was there in February with you. You'd been talking about this for a while. I came up to Birmingham. We had about 2 hours together, and you said, "Listen, I need to go." And I said, "Oh, why you got to go?" And you said, "No, we've got some Chinese investors coming in, and we're doing this deal, and blah blah blah. I'm not gonna steal your thunder." But I was like, "Wow, that sounds really interesting. Like, how could we get to participate in that?" And you said to me, "Look, let me go and do my work. And once I've figured it out, I'll come and talk to you, and we'll let the Wealth Migrate investors know." So it's I'm super excited. I know you've been ferreting below the scenes to get all the T's and T's crossed and the I's dotted and all that. But I'll never forget that day when you told me about it, and I was like, "Wow, that would be a wonderful opportunity to be able to participate." So yeah,
it is, and it's been a bit of time in iteration and development, etc. But we are where we are now, and we're happy to start telling people about it. We're that close, basically. So let me share some slides and to give you a little bit of and as you said, I'm going to provide a little bit of an update on what's happening in the UK property market, because I am very fortunate to have my finger on the pulse, as you quite rightly said. And so I'm going to share that. Can you see those slides okay?
Let's just see there quickly. Yeah, we got you perfect. They're coming up live. Yeah, perfect.
And this really is,
I mean, what I'm going to do, Simon, just for now, I'm just going to switch my camera off unless I'm talking to you, just so that we can focus.
Okay, no problem at all.
I'm here for anything you want.
Okay, excellent. So, I think we all understand that investing in property is one of the best assets you can absolutely invest in. But you know what? You've got to know what you're doing. People do lose money in property because they don't know what to do. They don't educate themselves. But when done correctly, I'm sure you'll agree that property is a very stable investment. And I suppose the testament to that is if you go to a bank and say, "I want to borrow some money to buy some shares or invest in some cryptocurrency, they'll say, can't really help you. But if you say, I want to borrow some money to buy some property, they'll say, sit down, let's have a chat about it, right? Because people understand property is one of the safest investments you can probably make. And that's because people will always need somewhere to live. No matter what happens in the economy, accommodation is always required, okay? But there are some challenges with property, and actually it's getting a bit harder and a bit more expensive to invest in property. And that actually creates an opportunity, which I'll share for you later. I'm very quickly, those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Scott's touched some on this, but I set up the Property Investors Network back in 2003. And that's because at that point, I'd become financially independent thanks to the income from my property. I'd left my full-time corporate career a few years earlier at Cadbury's, where I was in the chocolate manufacturers. And by the way, I loved that job. It was a fantastic job, great company, great people, great product, but I just like my freedom a bit more. I only got like 5 weeks holiday. And I don't know about you, but 5 weeks is definitely not enough. So I took I took redundancy. Actually, I decided to resign basically, and people thought I was crazy, but I had the income from my property to support me. I had a part-time business running student nightclub events, which is a good, fun thing to do. And I was doing property very much kind of part-time. And I got to 2003, 8 years after I started, and I realized actually I was quite lonely on my journey. And that's because investing in property can be lonely because people around that don't get it, that no one teaches you how to do this at school or college, etc. You may be lucky enough to have a family member, a friend who invests in property, maybe learn from them, or you stumble across something like Wealth Migrate or PIN and learn that way. But most people just don't have that knowledge. Now, back in 2003, there was nothing. So I set up the very first networking here in Birmingham, where I still live. I come from Kent originally. And now there are 45 plus meetings around the UK and even a couple of meetings in Holland as well. So we provide the support network for people to learn about successful investing. We don't sell any properties. We just teach people how to become more successful investors. And I've been doing that 22 years. I don't think there's anyone in the UK who's been teaching consistently longer than I have. And I like to think I've become pretty good at teaching. And also I've made lots of mistakes, so we can help all our students avoid all the mistakes I have made. And I've seen many other people make over the years. And actually, that's what I love to do. I love teaching, I love training. And I got very serious about that in 2007 when I started my year-long property mastermind program. And our goal is to help people replace their income very, very quickly. I wrote a book, as I said, called Property Magic in 2006. We're currently in 2008, I released it. We're currently on our 6th edition, 7th edition coming out this summer. And in 2013, I set up Crowd Property because I was doing bigger development deals myself, commercial to residential conversions. And I was telling my students, look, you should use other people's money. That's what I was doing. I was using some of mine, I was using other people's private money. And I was working with people, and I still do work with people who invest with me. They lend me chunks of 50K and multiples of that. They get a very good return on investment. They get to look over my shoulder. They get to learn from the experience. And, they're pretty comfortable that I'm a pretty safe bet because no one's ever lost their money lending to me. And it would cost me a lot of money if I didn't pay people back because of my reputation and what I do. I wouldn't be able to do all the stuff I do. So it's pretty safe to invest with me. But I realized on my database, a lot of people who didn't have £50,000 and might still want to get a good return on their money. And also I had lots of students who were finding really good development deals. It might be a house to an HMO or a pub to a block of flats, whatever. And they were finding it difficult to borrow from banks who don't really understand development. So I set up this debt platform that takes care of all the paperwork. It's FCA regulated, takes care of everything we need really. And so we find great deals. We tie that up with investors, and we have private investors who use money from their personal savings, money from their pension, money from their business. And also we have institutions and family offices who also invest through our platform because we have a lot of experience. We've done over 400 loans and a very, very good payback rate. We have had 1 or 2 loans that have gone bad, but obviously we have the ability to solve those, and some of those we'll be able to solve and some we haven't. But that's a pretty good track record given the number of loans and the amount we've actually lent, which is almost £500 million. So I know a lot about lending and borrowing. And I just position this to show I've been around a very long time. I don't claim to know it all. I'm learning all the time. We're innovating all the time. And I'm still actively investing because I don't know about you, but I believe right now is a really good time to be investing. And I'm going to get on to that in a moment. So let's back up a little bit. I know we've got some people from the UK, some from all around the world. Why is the UK a great place to invest? Well, first of all, we have political stability. You may not agree with what the government at the time actually does. And frankly, I think the current government are not the smartest. And I don't think the last government were that good either for investors. But still, we have a pretty political, stable system here. If you think about supply and demand in the UK with basic macroeconomics, there is not enough accommodation. All of the major political parties agree that we need something like 300,000 new homes every year to keep up with the demand. And we're building less than 200,000. Now, the Labour government who got in last July, they actually pledged they're going to help build 1.5 million homes over their 5-year term, i.e. 300,000 a year. Now, of course, governments don't build properties, but they stimulate the environment to do that. But we've got some challenges here. There's challenges with planning permission. There's challenges of lack of labor, expensive materials. So there's no way they're going to build 300,000 homes a year for the next 5 years. It's just never, ever going to happen. And by the way, the Conservatives had a goal of 1.6 million, just over 300,000 a year for that 5-year period. But because we've got this growing population, we've got increasing immigration, we've got changing social demographic trends, more people living on their own, people getting divorced, that kind of thing, more kids going to university. We just need more accommodation, and we cannot build enough property quick enough. That is the reality, and will be like that for a number of years. Also, anybody can own property in the UK. You don't have to be a UK citizen. You can absolutely invest as a foreign investor. You do pay a bit more tax. You can't get as much finance, but you can absolutely do that. And we do have advanced finance and refinancing possibilities. For example, here in the UK, we generally get interest-only mortgages on our investment properties, where many places around the world, you have to have repayment mortgages. And when the value of property goes up, we can refinance it to take some of the equity out. So that's very, very possible. It's a very sophisticated market. This is why so many people from around the world want to invest in the UK, and many UK investors don't bother investing elsewhere because it works so well here. So that's a little bit about the plus sides. Now, to be really balanced, and just like Scott said, we like to be very transparent, there are obviously some downsides to investing in the UK. We've had increasing taxation. So back in April 2017, the government introduced something called Section 24. And that was a Conservative government at the time, where basically if you own property in your own name and you're a higher rate taxpayer and you have a mortgage, which most investors do, then you're going to pay a lot more taxes on your rental income. So where it was usually best for people to buy in their own name, for most people, that is generally not the case. So people who are investing now are generally buying in company structures, not always, but generally that's what they do. And actually a lot of older landlords, because they're paying more tax, are deciding to sell up their properties. I'm going to come back to that because it's a very important point that everything I'm going to talk about tonight really hinges on. Also, the Labour government in their budget at the back end of 2024 said, right, anyone who's buying a second home or a property investment, they have to pay an extra 5% stamp duty. Now, stamp duty is the tax we pay when we buy a property. It's paying tax for nothing, really. It's just the government collecting money. It's a sliding scale depending how valuable the property is. So for cheaper properties, less than 125, there's no stamp duty. And then as the value goes up, the percentage goes up till, if it's a £1 million plus property, you're paying over 10% stamp duty. It's ridiculous, but that's the way it is. In addition to that, there's this extra 5% that investors have to pay in the UK. Now, it was 3%, and that was introduced by Conservatives. The Labour Party made it 5%. So there's an extra tax you have to pay when you buy a property. And a lot of investors are still trying to swallow that bitter pill. And it means that many investors are not as active now as they could be. They're kind of getting used to the extra stamp duty. When it first came in, the 3% back in 2016, I think it was, again, I remember lots of people saying, oh, deals don't work anymore. We just got better at negotiating on the purchase price, and we worked that into the price, really. So that's what's going to happen here. People will still buy, they will come back, but at the moment, not many people are doing it for that reason. If you're an overseas investor, there's an extra 2% on top of that. So it's the normal stamp plus 7% stamp duty. This is a bit of a barrier to anyone who wants to invest in the UK from overseas. people still do it, but it's not as good for overseas investors. But we have a solution for this that we'll talk about in a moment. There's also increasing legislation. So the Conservatives were going to do something called the Renters Reform Bill, where they wanted to improve tenant rights. Tenants do have lots of rights at the moment, but it probably has been more in the favor of the landlord. This is definitely moving it into the favor of the tenants. And the Labour government are continuing this as the Renters' Rights Bill. They couldn't possibly call it the same thing, although a lot of things are very similar. And a lot of landlords are very worried about this. If someone's been a landlord for 20 years, they look at things now, they can say, well, it's not as good now as it used to be. But if you're coming into it now, well, you just deal with it. And guess what? Because lots of landlords are selling up, it means there's more opportunity for those of us who are staying in or jumping into the market. And there very much is this field, well, it's not as good as it used to be. Okay, so these are some of the downsides of investing in property in the UK at the moment. And also we have relatively high interest rates, higher than they have been for the last decade. Now, they are starting to come down. And again, for overseas investors, they have to pay slightly higher interest rates. And there are not as many lenders that will lend to those people. But if you really want to invest in the UK and you're based overseas, you absolutely can. It's just going to cost you a bit more money to do that than someone who's investing in the UK. Again, an important point I'm going to come back to later on. So what does all this mean for you and the UK property market? Well, as I said, many landlords are wanting to sell up and retire. In any industry, you're always going to have people who are coming into the industry and at the same time, people who are exiting the industry. That just happens in any industry, but there's more and more landlords selling up because of the reasons I've already mentioned. Add to that, the general market here in the UK is what we call a buyer's market. Now, when COVID came, the government intervened and they got rid of the stamp duty. They had to have stamp duty holidays for a couple of years. They created lots of bounce back loans, and lots of that money found its way back into the property market. And we actually had an unexpected boom in property prices. People were desperate to move out of city centres into the countryside, houses with gardens, etc. And so we had this unexpected boom in property that petered out and started to come down. And then with the interest rates that started to go up in February 22, it meant it was more expensive to buy properties. The market's definitely cooled off and come back slightly. It hasn't crashed, but we have this buyer's market where there are more people looking to sell than there are buyers looking to buy. So what that means is it's taking a while for things to sell, and people generally need to sell at a little bit of a discount off the true market value if they want to sell it now. So what that means is it's not a good time to be selling property. Again, a very important point I'm going to come back to later. It is a great time to be buying property. We can get discounts, we can get flexibility, things like options and vendor finance, etc. And also in this current market, there might be some landlords who are prepared to sell at a bit of a discount because they're just fed up and they want to get out of the game. But despite all of this, there are many investors just sitting back, waiting to see what happens with interest rates, which are coming down, waiting to see what happens with the Renters' Rights Bill, probably coming in later this year or early next year. So whilst most people are sitting back doing nothing, there's actually a golden opportunity to get involved and make the most of the market. And many of my students are very active right now and securing some amazing deals. The property market, I believe, will pick up towards the end of 2025. Why? Well, because interest rates are coming down, people get used to this extra stamp duty, and the prices will be such that people say, yeah, it's time to get back in now. So I believe generally, end of 25 or even 26, we'll see prices start to go up. And we'll see the natural macroeconomics come into effect where there just is not enough supply. That means that rents and also values go up over time. So there's good long-term growth predicted in the UK market. That's just because of the fundamental macroeconomics, okay? So that's the situation. Now, what does this mean for landlords? Now, most landlords are very happy. They're getting on, they're making money, really happy. But there are some landlords who want to sell up and retire. Remember, there's always some people wanting to do that, but there's more than ever before because they've had really good capital growth over the last 20 years or so. and it's not as good as it used to be now. So they think, we know what, maybe I'm going to cash in and just do something else with my money. They've got good equity in their property. Equity is always the difference between the value of the property and any debt that might be on that property. Some landlords have paid down the mortgages completely, so there's no mortgages at all. Some landlords have got gearing still because they refinance, use that money to go and buy other properties. Now, some of these landlords, the reason they might want to sell is maybe they want to use their money for other things. Maybe there's some landlords who've got property and they recognize that actually it is a really good time to buy, and I wish I had some extra cash to buy some more properties. There are some people who might want to pay down some other debt. Some people who might want to invest in cryptocurrency or whatever. Bitcoin's doing really well recently. So all sorts of reasons people might want to access some of this equity in their property. Now, listen carefully, as a property investor, we can generally get up to 75% loan to value. So if a property is worth, let's say 500,000, let's keep it, if it's worth 200,000, we could get up to 150,000 pounds of debt from a traditional bank. And the 50,000 pounds is the equity trapped in that property. Now, if you imagine people got a number of properties and they've got a sizable portfolio, they could actually have millions of pounds of trapped equity in property that it's just doing nothing at all, right? So they often want to access some of that money. However, remember, it's a buyer's market. There are more sellers than buyers. And if they sold properties now, they probably would not get the full price. And most landlords want to get the full price for their property. Now, if it means they get the cash they need now, well, they might be okay with that. But if they sell a property and they've had some good growth, which we had over the last 15, 20 years, then they'll have to pay some tax on that money if they sell the property. And also, if they sell now, obviously, they're not going to get any benefit of the future growth we expect over the next few years. So you've got landlords in this real kind of dilemma, thinking, well, I've got all this equity. I'd like to access some of the money. I can only remortgage up to 75%. And actually remortgaging now, the interest rates are maybe not very good. So there's this real dilemma. What do they actually do? And as I said, if they did actually sell, they'd have to pay capital gains tax on the gain. Because in the UK, if you sell a property for more than you bought it for, if it's not your primary residence, we have to pay capital gains tax, okay? So what does the landlord do about this situation? Well, we have a solution. I've come up with a solution. This is very new. You won't have heard about this before because this is a real innovation. I call it landlord equity release, okay? Now, this is where a landlord gets a loan on their property. They'll have the normal first charge mortgage on that property, but they go and get an extra loan for 3 to 5 years for some of the equity that's trapped in their property. Okay, so get to release some of that equity to do whatever they want with. And because it's debt, they don't have to pay any tax on that money now. So they get to use the money without paying tax, which in my book is a pretty good thing, right? And the cost of this borrowing, because they're going to have to pay interest on this loan, the cost of the debt comes out of the rental cash flow. So this is properties that have a good rental, they've got a profitable rental, and that can more than afford to pay the cost of the borrowing. And they keep managing their property just like before. And then they're going to sell the property. So at the end of the loan term, they're going to sell the property, and the value will probably, there's no guarantees, but probably have gone up in value over the next 3 to 5 years in the UK. And they're going to get some of this capital growth. They're going to get a share of that. Not all of it, but some of it. And bear in mind, if they'd sold their property now in 2025, they'd get none of the future capital growth. So this is a really great solution for the owner. They get to use some of the equity now. They don't have to pay tax on it. They don't have to sell their property necessarily at a discount. In fact, they're going to sell in the future, and they're going to get more money in the future than they would get right now. If you can see how this could work really well for landlords, just put landlords into the chat box. If you can see how, yeah, the owner of the property to the landlord, how this could be pretty good for them, just put landlord into the chat box. And it's really important that you understand this and get your head around this, because whenever you enter anything, you need to understand what's going on and see the benefits. When I teach property investing, I teach win-win property investing. we're always trying to look for a solution that works for all parties concerned. With crowd property, I had people who wanted to borrow money, put money in the bank, couldn't do anything, and I created the platform to facilitate the loans between those people. This is not something we're doing through crowd property, because crowd property only do development. This is something new and different, and actually we're doing this through Wealth Migrate, which is why you're the first people to hear about this. So I'm pleased. Lots of people said landlords. Now, people may, by the way, if you can't see why this would help a landlord, just put, I don't get it. And that's okay. If you're not an investor, maybe you don't understand it, but I don't get it, because I'm surprised we don't have more people saying landlord, i.e. they can see the benefits for the landlord. But if you don't get it, just put, I don't get it into the chat box, and that's okay. We'll do some Q&A later on. Okay. And if you don't get it,
maybe it's the cold weather, Simon. We've got to wake them up, and get them to participate and engage. You and I both know that it's people that take action that gets results,
Well, you know what? It's people who are action takers who make money. And I think one of the big problems when people get on webinars and they hear about opportunities, they think, oh, interesting, but I'm not too sure, I'm too busy. And guys, if something it doesn't resonate, fine. But if something makes sense, you need to check into it, do your due diligence, make sure you're happy with it, as if you're buying a property or a business, whatever. But you got to take action. You sit there just listening, that's not going to make you wealthy, unfortunately. Much as Scott and I would love that to be the case. Come and listen to our webinars, you'll make money. That's not the case. You've got to take action.
The only place that you can get wealthy like that is when you go to one of those sellathons and buy one of those get-rich-quick schemes, because obviously then you can sit on your bum and do nothing,
Well, yeah, yes. Let's not get on those.
Sorry, I'm going down a little rant there, but anyway, back to you.
And I'm glad more people are coming to landlords, guys. So if you genuinely get it, come and find the chat box. And if you're on your phone, it's a bit harder, come and type landlord. Now, people have some questions here. I think I get it, but I want to check. That's okay. I'm just trying to give you a principle here, guys. Okay. And I'm going to give you a practical example that might help explain it. Okay. But this is a solution for landlords. Now, the landlords in this solution, we're going to let them access up to 80% of the equity. That's not 80% the value. It's 80% of the equity. And you'll see what I mean about when I talk about the live case study. Okay. So what are the benefits for the cash investors? Maybe the Wealth Migrate customers or some of my property investor network clients who would love to get into property, but they don't have enough money, they don't have the time, the energy, they just want to get a bit of a return, and they want to get some equity growth without having to buy property, without having to pay stamp duty, without having to get mortgage. Listen up, because this is amazing. And Scott allows you to do this to a certain extent with Wealth Migrate. You can invest in opportunities all over the world. You can diversify, which is really important. And you can do that with Wealth Migrate. But I think we've done a little bit of a plus on what Wealth Migrate currently do. I might be wrong, Scott, but I think this is a bit of an innovation for you and your clients as well. So let me explain how this works.
No, look, just quickly, I want to say this. It is an innovation. And what I love about it is always when you're bringing new innovative ways where the market might have challenges, but you're bringing an innovative way to take on those challenges, that where real opportunity exists. So that's why I'm excited. And again, you're dealing with someone that's done $800+ million. So I think pounds, so I'm all ears to someone with that type of experience who's bringing innovation,
Absolutely. So here's the thing. If you've got a couple of options, you might think, you know what, I know we've got people here in the UK, but people overseas as well. And I'm sure a lot more people watching the recording who are overseas probably. You say, hey, you know what, I want to go and invest in the UK. And you can tap in to the people in the Property Investors Network. You can find people who can source deals for you. You can joint venture with people, and you can do all of that. I would suggest if you do that, you want to work with people who've got a track record and experience, obviously, but that's you can definitely do. But that's a far more involved thing. If you can't even be able to type landlord into a chat box, that's way out of your league. You're never going to be able to do that. But it is possible if someone's a real action taker, okay? With this, you get to partner with established and experienced investors in the UK because you get to buy into their existing property. Now, this is really important because this is very different from funding. What we do at Crowd Property is quite a high level of risk because we're investing in someone who's buying something. They're going to convert it. They're going to add value, hopefully refinance it and rent it out. A lot can go wrong in that process. But this is someone who is not doing development. They already have an existing property which is generating cash flow. So there's no development risk because it's up and running. Also, that means you actually get income from day one because it's got a proven track record, and we're only working with landlords and owners who've got a rental track record on a particular property for at least 12 months. So you can see what the rents have been, what the level of voids have been, etc. What this means is you can get cash flow, that's a typo there, sorry, from day one, and it's paid quarterly. So when you make an investment, you start earning interest straight away, and the first quarter payment is within 3 months, okay? There's no buying costs, so you're not having any stamp duty, no legal costs to do. There's no maintenance costs of the ongoing, which if you invest in property, you will have to pay normally. But in this case, the owner keeps paying the maintenance costs as they normally would do. And there's no tenants to deal with. And believe me, if you invest in property would be great if it wasn't for the tenants, right? Now, tenants are pretty important because they're your customers in your property business. They're paying you every month. I get agents to look after all my properties for me. I don't want to deal with tenants. I don't want to speak to tenants. In fact, a tenant could walk down the street. I wouldn't even know who they are. That's the way I want it to be. But if you're investing directly, you need to deal with tenants. In this case, the landlord still manages the property they've already been doing successfully. You don't have to deal with that. Now, you get the benefit of leverage. Often there are platforms, I'm not quite sure what Wealth Migrate to, but there are some crowdfunding platforms where you can go and buy a property and they buy it cash. They buy it cash, which has certain benefits, but they're not using mortgages and they're not getting the benefit of leverage. And that's one of the best things about property. A bank, a lender will lend you money, you pay them interest each year, and at the end, when you pay it back, you get all the equity growth. That's an amazing thing about property, right? But if you get a mortgage, then that means you have to be on the mortgage. You've got to be liable for that. If something goes wrong with a property, you could potentially lose the property, you could be pursued, etc. So there are some commitments and liabilities of getting a mortgage. And if you are more than 20% shareholder in a property, even if someone else owns 80%, you've got 20%, you need to be on the finance in the UK as well. Okay, so that's a downside. But in this situation, you are not on the mortgage. They already have a mortgage. You are not on that mortgage. So no mortgages or financial commitments. So as a cash investor, you get this interest from day one, paid quarterly, and you get some of the upside of the property growth. And that's the innovation I think we're bringing to this. You are going to share some of the capital growth from a base point over the next 3 to 5 years of this loan with the property owner. And that means the property owner makes more money than if they just sold it now. They get some money now without paying tax on it. You're the person providing part of that loan through Wealth Migrate. And what that means is you get this great return. You sit back and just watch the money pour in, which is pretty cool. So this is called Holloway House. This is down in Taunton in Somerset. And full declaration, I actually am a joint venture partner with the gentleman who owns this place, a guy called Innes. I actually found this deal. It was a motivated seller. We bought it using vendor finance, which was great. We both put some money into it. We bought it vendor finance. We then remortgaged it. And because I partnered with this guy Innes, because he was actually in fairly close to the area. He's a very experienced investor. And the deal was, I found the deal. We'll both fund it together, and he can then manage it. And he's done a great job managing it. But he's got to the point, he's got a new partner, and he said, you know what, I'm not sure I really want to do this. We've had some good equity growth. He wants to exercise, he wants to get some of that equity out. And so I don't really want to sell. And it's when we have a partnership. You know, he wants to get his money out. I don't want to sell because I think it's going to have it's a lovely little development. He's done a great job tenanting it, and it's all rented out, good cash flow coming in. I don't want to sell it. And I think there's going to be some good capital growth. So the reason this came about really was for me looking for a creative solution to give my JV partner what he wants, to give him his equity, and also for me to stay in the game. Was that a question, Scott?
No, sorry, I was drinking my water.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Okay. So
There are some questions, but I'll bring them up once you finish.
we'll come to those later. Now, so just full declaration. I'm talking about this deal, but I actually have an interest in this deal. Okay, just for it. Now, there won't always be the case, but I'm just doing this as a first deal, where this is a case study, and this is the first deal we are doing. Again, full declaration. But I think once we've done this first deal and got all the I's dotted and T's crossed, etc., I think there are going to be lots and lots of from my community, people I know, who thinks this is amazing for landlords and investors who can say, yeah, this is pretty good for an investor who wants to be in property, but they don't want all the normal hassle associated with that, and better returns than just doing a loan. So this is a block of 10 one-bed properties, 10 apartments in Taunton in Somerset. It's quite close to the town. The current market value is about 1.2 million. I think we bought it for £850,000. So, and that was back in 2001. So we've had a good bit of growth over the last few years, which is great. There's probably about £400,000 of equity because the debt is just under £800,000, and there's about 3 years to run on the existing mortgage. Okay, so that's a scenario of the property. So about £400,000 of equity. If we sold this, Innes and I would both get £200,000 now. We'd both have to pay tax on that money, etc. And I don't really want to sell. He kind of wants his 200K. I'm owed 100K from the business as well, but he wants his 200K. But this is a better solution. Okay. Now, if the owner in his sells now, we're not going to get the full price on this, because there's buyer's market. Although it's all rented, there might be some landlords who come and say, this is great, I've got to do nothing, cash investor, put the money in, great, it's giving a good rental return, no work at all. But it might stay on the market for a while, and that's not a great solution. Innes wants to get his funds out. If he sold, we sold, he'd have to pay his capital gain tax on the equity. So instead, what we're going to do is we are doing a 300K raise. And again, 300 will go to Innes. He's taking out a loan. He'll get his 200 equity with paying no tax on it at the moment. I'll actually get 100 that I put in initially back, and I'll be leaving 100 of my equity in the deal. And again, that's a nice little extra sweet thing here because it means there's some guaranteed extra profit at the end. And it's a 3-year loan, and it's going to be paying 6% per annum. So 6%, look, that's not incredibly exciting, to be perfectly honest. You can't get that in the bank. You won't be earning that on money in the bank. You could invest direct with people and get more, but I would say there's probably more risk. We'll show you how we've minimized the risk for you here. But the kicker here is, as well as this fixed return of 6% per annum, there's also a share of the equity growth. And the share on this particular deal, it does vary, but this particular deal is 40% of the capital growth, but it's from a base of 1.1 million. Why is that the case? Well, I'm leaving £100,000 of my equity in, and to do this deal, I'm prepared to leave that equity in and share some of that equity. Okay, so what that means is the value now is about 1.2. We're just getting a RICS valuation on that, but 1.2 is about the value we believe. And whoever comes in is not only going to get a 3-year of 6% a year paid quarterly, they're also going to get 40% of the capital growth. Now, if the property does nothing and does not go up in value over the next 3 years, which is unlikely, but is always possible, there's at least £40,000 of extra profit to be shared amongst all the investors who do the initial £300,000 loan, in addition to the interest. So what does the lender actually get? Well, you can invest, and Scott and I need to talk about this. I just thought 5K was a good starting point. You might have a lower threshold for people to get into, but it could be up to 300K. I mean, I don't particularly want just one person in, but one person could come in and do the whole deal if they wanted to do that. You're going to get a fixed return of 6% per annum for 3 years. So each year, that's not for 3, that's each year you get a 6% return paid quarterly, plus a share of the leverage growth. Remember, there's a mortgage on this property, but you have no liability for that mortgage. You're getting some leveraged growth, okay? This is going to be 40% of the capital growth over the base of 1.1 million. Now, say if there's no growth at all and the property sold in 3 years for 1.2 million, that would be £40,000. Okay. However, let's assume there's maybe a 5% growth per annum, which is a very, very conservative growth rate. I think we could easily achieve that over the next 5 years. If we compound that up, the value in 3 years, if it's 1.2 now, 5% compounded will be about 1.39 million. And that's just allowing the market to go up over time. And also rents will be increasing over time as well. So the equity share, the 40% of the gain up to 1.39 over 1.1 million would actually be a further 115,000. So 115,000 would be shared equally amongst the investors proportionally, depending how much they put in the initial 300,000. So that's an extra 38% return on investment over the 3 years. If you add that to the 6% a year, that actually comes out to be 18.8% per annum. Now, I don't know about you, but that's a pretty good return. Is that guaranteed? No. The fixed return is 6% per annum. If property prices came down, it could go down to 1.1 million. If it was sold at that, there'd be no bonus, but there'd still be plenty of money to get your cash back to you. And that's how you get your cash back. And whenever you make any loan, any investment, not only do you want to know what is the interest rate you get, what's the return on investment, is when and how are you going to get that money back? And from the sale of that property is how the money's going to come back in 3 years' time. Innes is happy to sell it in 3 years' time because he's going to get his cash now and he's going to get some of the equity growth over the duration of the loan. So that's pretty much how that works. Now, whenever you make any kind of investment, any kind of loan, you think, okay, what's the security? What's the kind of loan? Well, the landlord, first of all, is an experienced investor, and they've got other assets. So assets, sorry. These weren't proofread. Sorry, they got other assets. And that's good because if you're doing a loan with someone, you have a personal guarantee. That's only worth anything if they've got other assets to go after. Okay. There's an established rental income on this property with very high occupancy rates. So there's more than enough cash flow to pay the interest payments. And there's always a question you should ask them, how are they going to afford to pay the interest? Well, that comes from the cash flow. There'd be a loan agreement in place with Innes personally and also a personal guarantee in place. What that means is if he didn't pay it, you can take it to court. Wealth Migrate routine in the same way that we do that at Crown Property. If someone doesn't pay the loan back, technically we've been taken to court, we could ultimately make them bankrupt. Anyone's got assets, they don't really want to go bankrupt. Okay, so there's a bit of security there. But, and this is really important, you might say, what if the owner doesn't want to sell it in 3 years' time? There's an option agreement in place. And an option is a right to buy, basically. And what that is, that's an option agreement to purchase for £800,000. Now, remember, it's worth 1.2 now. 1.1 is the base of which you get a profit share. But in the event of a default, if the investor didn't pay the loan back, Wealth Migrate would be able to step in and actually exercise the option and basically buy the property for $800,000. Now, they could do that if they wanted, which would be a very below market value purchase and just get the rental income. However, that option is also assignable. What they'd do in reality, and I would obviously help with this, is to sell the property on to someone else. If they sold it at least for 1.1 million, that would generate the 300,000 to pay back to all of the investors. If it's sold for more than 1 million, more like the proper market price or even more than the current market price because of the growth, that extra dividend will be shared amongst the investors. So there's that security there. The owner has to sell because Wealth Migrate could step in and take control of it. Also, in case something happened to the landlord, anything can happen to anyone, next 3 years, there's life insurance in place. So rather than having to wait for a sale to happen, then the life insurance would pay out back to Wealth Migrate, who could distribute it to all of the investors. So that's a quick summary of how that works. I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions. I'm happy to answer those questions. But Scott, I'm going to come back to you first of all to ask you, as someone who's been investing a long time, what do you like about this? What don't you like about this? I mean, we've talked about it as well, but what's your honest view of this? What's good? What's bad?
So what I wanted to do was start here, basically. So I always teach people the 4 golden rules to kind of finding partners and stuff. So the first one is someone who's got a track record of 10 years or plus. So what I like here, Simon, is I know that you are very similar to me. You know, I'll be close on 3 decades, and I think you're the same. So you
Yes,
real
this year is my third decade. Yeah.
well, exactly. That's my point. I'm on 28 years, so I'm 2 years behind you. But the point being is that you know, you've got significant track record in this area, which I think is really important. The second is a specific market knowledge. So you've specialized in the UK property market. To some extent, you've specialized in even the residential market, and specifically, you've specialized in these, you know, basically where you've got multiple flats, bigger units. You know, yes, you've done 1-bedroom houses, but you've also done the multiple flats, etc. But basically, it's a residential space, right from what I call mom and pop investing, right through to institutional investing. You've done it, so you've got a really great experience there. The third one is you're putting your own money into the deal. So I don't know if everyone picked that up, but in a raise of £300,000, Simon is putting 100,000 of his own equity in.
Yeah,
so,
I'm leaving 100,000 of my equity in the deal.
Correct. So you know, you can look at that in it's 100 over 300, or it's 100 over 400, but it's at least 25% of the total equity in the deal in terms of, you know, so it's very much along one of these things where your money's you got your money where your mouth is. You're not telling other people to do stuff without doing it yourself. And I don't know if you noticed, I'm always listening for the little quirks, but right at the end there, he said, and if there was a problem, you know, I would help with X, Y, and Z. Well, look, you know, of course you would, because you're tied to the ship, you know, and that's the thing. Like, all ships go through a storm, but you want your captain to be tied to the same mast as you, and on the same terms. And then finally, 80% of the equity is coming from local investors. And, you know, we've already been through this, but between you and your partner on the ground, UK-based people, you know, deep understanding of the UK market, and being able to participate. So that for me is the high level. Like, I always start, anyone that ever follows anything I do, start with the partners. You know, can you even trust the partners? Now you go down to the deal. And for me, the deal, what I like about it is a number of things. One is it's very hassle-free. So we're partnering with you, who's a partner that's got tremendous experience, but I don't have to go out. I don't have to collect the rents. I don't have to manage the tenants or the broken toilets or the roof or anything along those lines. So that for me is critical. The second thing that I like is that you've got a fixed income. So you know what you're dealing with on the fixed income side. And so you're not worrying about, do I have a tenant this month? I mean, there's 10 different apartments. Do they all rent at the same time? You know, blah, blah, blah. You're not worrying about that. So particularly as an investor, you can rely on a fixed income. Thirdly, you're benefiting from the capital growth on the upside. So it's not just a debt deal, to your example of putting your money in the bank, because you've got the capital growth on the upside. And then the last thing, which I think is important, is that there is a strategy for an exit. So you're going into a deal with an exit on the table, and you're also understanding why the current owners are doing this, because it makes sense for them. So, you know, if there's a fifth one for me, it would be alignment. And if I've ever learned anything in property, or any investing for that matter, if you've got alignment between all the partners, you know, yourselves, the investors, the tenants, everyone, then you've got a long-term gain. So yeah, I'd probably sum it up, Simon. I could go into a lot more detail, but those are the ones that I really liked. And then also for me going forward, what I like about what you're doing is that this allows you, through your extensive network, to cherry pick the best deals, and to take advantage of the current UK market, and to allow us investors to participate in that UK market without having to do all the heavy lifting. And as Warren Buffett says, when there's blood on the streets, take advantage, type thing. And you know, to all the reasons you've already said, there is opportunity in England. I know I'm selling a property right now in the UK.
Yeah, definitely. So it's an exciting opportunity. And let's go. You want to read out some of the questions? I mean, some that we would have answered.
No, there were a couple. So let's. I'm just going to go back up to the top, because there were a couple that sort of came through here. So let me just look here. Simon, what are the numbers, returns, capital growth, term, exit strategy? So I think Peter, he answered that. Just let us know if by any reason he didn't. I know that Peter.
Yeah. By the way, Peter, no one knows. I wish I knew with certainty. No one knows what the capital growth is going to be. Anyone says it's going to grow this much, it's always a guess, an estimate. So I think using 5% is a very conservative amount for growth.
Yeah. And just by the way, that's quite interesting you used 5%, because I was doing a modeling exercise in the UK with my business partner, Jakob Moritz, 2 days ago. And there's 3 scenarios that you can work on. But actually, the long-term average for the UK over the last 50 years has been 9%. So
Absolutely.
I just want to put that in perspective of 5%
Yeah.
is quite
I'm being
conservative.
ultra, who knows what it could be? I mean, it might be nothing. It might not grow at all. That's very unlikely, but that's what you have to understand here. But even if there was no growth at all, there's still an equity bonus because I'm sharing some more equity. And I'm prepared to do that because I think actually I'm going to make a lot more than if we just sold it now. I'm
Yeah.
going to make a lot more by staying in deal, which is why I'm kind of putting my money where my mouth is in this particular deal. And that won't always be the case. But in this one, because I've got an interest, that's what's happening.
Just Simon, this isn't a question, but it's a comment I want to bring up because you mentioned it earlier, and I just want to assume, I'm going to assume people don't know what it is. So the one thing that's important here is that this is not Simon and his buddy going, hey, thumb suck, my property is worth X value. A RICS valuation stands for Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. They are like an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor. They are a group of professionals. You have to be properly qualified. You have to keep up your certifications. They are, in England, they are very, very highly qualified. And they are the sort of the standard around how you get an external valuation.
It's what the banks use. If the banks are going to lend you money, you have to get a RICS valuation. And so we have a pretty good sense. We think it's about 120,000 per flat, 10 of them 1.2 million. But we will be getting a RICS valuation on this anyway. We don't have that yet, but we're pretty certain that's going to be 1.2 to show the current value. But even if it's more, we're still prepared to do the deal, the price we've just said.
Yeah. And I think I'm just pointing out because that's really, really important. I tell you what, Simon, I've got a poll here. I'd love to know what people's thoughts are. I'm going to launch this while we're doing the question. We'll just leave the poll up while we're doing it. Is that cool? Yeah. Just let us know. I'd love people's feedback as in terms of where we're at. So Peter Stott said, why doesn't the landlord simply go back to the existing lender and borrow more?
Okay, because remember I said that in the UK, banks will end up to 75% loan to value. So if the value is 1.2 million, they'd only lend up to 900,000 because that's 75% of 1.2 million. Also, the bank rates are not very favorable at the moment. So if he wanted to, he's got a reasonable rate on the first just under 800,000. To get the extra amount, you'll have to go to get a second charge lender, which will be a much higher interest rate. Or if you remortgage the whole amount, the actual mortgage would be higher per month per year than the current rate. So it's just not a viable solution. By working with private investors, they might be prepared to go to a higher loan to value and up to 80% of the equity in the property.
Yeah, and I think
sorry, because the equity is 400,000. 80% of that would be 320, but we just want 300 because that does the numbers right for us, basically.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, I think from my perspective as well, there's so many reasons why. I know the typical way is, just go and borrow money and take your equity out of the property. But it's a lot more difficult, the lending environment right now, and it doesn't matter who you speak to in property, almost anywhere in the world, it's the same. So this provides a tax efficient way to be able to do it as well. Okay.
Absolutely.
Jay, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, said, so if I understand correctly, this is separate from crowd property and it will only be available on the Wealth Migrate platform.
So this has nothing to do with crowd property because crowd property only do debt, but this is actually debt and equity, which is why we're doing it with Wealth Migrate.
Perfect. Okay, then was it interest only payment? So Numusa said the 6% is an interest only, I presume.
Yes, it's interest only, which is what you generally do in the UK. And it's a capital payment back in 3 years when the property is sold. That's the exit strategy to pay it back.
Excellent. And Arthur was asking, how much is the mortgage?
It's just under 800,000 borrowing. And I can't remember what the exact math. I think it's 3.5, 4,000 a month. And so there's a couple of thousand profit. And so each on a monthly basis, so that profit, most of that profit will be used to pay the interest.
Okay. Peter said, Scott Simon, number quotes in pounds, currency fluctuation expectations impacts. So Peter, I'm going to try to read between the lines. Which currency are you comparing it to? The dollar or the euro? I assume you're not talking about the rand, but if you could just give me a little bit of
on that note, my note on that is if someone was going to actually buy property in the UK and invest and get the benefit of the capital growth and income in the UK, they'd be buying in pounds. You always should buy in the local currency. The risk of doing that as an overseas investor is absolutely currency fluctuation. So if you were investing a lot of money in the UK or a lot of money into this, what I would do, I would get a currency hedge, which is a separate transaction, so that if the currency goes against you, you're not losing any money.
Yeah, but just to be clear, I mean, neither you nor me, I should have said this up front actually, are giving financial advice tonight.
Absolutely. And no one knows what's going to happen to interest rates. No one knows what's going to happen to property prices. You always have to do your own due diligence.
Yeah.
This is purely education tonight.
Yeah. But I think the point being is that we do quite a lot of work with our family office and our mastermind members. And we also do quite a lot of work with James Painter. And there's strong indications that the pound and the euro are going to increase against the dollar. This is not a currency conversation, but I just wanted, where Donald Trump is actively wanting to devalue the dollar to make America more attractive for investment. And so actually the pound is a great place to be investing. And certainly from a diversification perspective, you want to have a balance and a diversification between the dollar, between the pound, and between the euro. And so this provides a great way to get into the pound and to be able to access the pound without having to do, basically through partnership, without having to do it all yourself, if that makes sense in terms of that process. Shona said, go Simon, nice deal. I think she knows you already. I saw Archie's online as well. So your fan club is here to support Simon in terms of the process.
There's a few names on here, which is good to see.
Paul asked, is Simon registered with the FSA?
So Crowd Property is registered with the FSA. So, FCA regulars. FSA has changed to the FCA. So Crowd Property is registered as that. As an individual, I am not registered with them, no, because I don't need to be.
Yeah. And just from a Wealth Migrate perspective, we also juristic rep under the FCA in England as well. So in terms of the client side. Benno said, will the property still be cash flow positive with the new combination of interest and mortgage interest and other costs?
Yes, it will. Yeah, most of the profit will go on paying the interest, but it will still be cash flow positive. And also there is some money in the bank, in the business bank account to pay for maintenance and things. But most of the flats have actually been refurbished, so they're pretty good standard.
Yeah. So I mean, basically, in any sort of account like this, that's what's known as I've just forgotten the bloody name now in England. But anyway, it's basically a holding account so that you don't have to do capital calls or anything like that. That's all taken into the financial numbers and the modeling and everything in between.
Yeah. It's one of my golden rules. Well, golden rule number 5 is always to have a cash buffer. And so there's a cash buffer in the business bank account.
Yeah. Do me a favor, for those that are here, if you haven't, I can see that 42% of you have participated. I'd love to get your feedback in terms of what Simon is proposing. Simon, talk to us a little bit about where you see the future going with these type of deals and the next couple of years. I know this is something that you've been working on for a while. And, when you and I spoke towards the end of last year, I know that debt in England, was something that didn't exist 10 years ago until someone like you came along. It was you or Lloyd's Bank, pretty much. I'm joking, but what I mean, like the big banks, Lloyd's and Barclays and everything. And I mean, you really innovated that whole debt space. You won numerous awards with Crowd Property. It's a significantly big company now and has a big impact on the property industry. This I see as that next thing, if that makes sense. And
well, I would love this to be as big as Crowd Property. I mean, Crowd Property is a huge business and a very profitable, successful business. This is different to Crowd Property, and this is an innovation because Crowd Property came about by spotting a need. There were people who were finding great deals, struggling to get loans from traditional banks and lenders, people with money in the bank who didn't have enough to work with me personally, and it created this platform. And I see this as an opportunity for people in the UK who have got good track record, they've got equity, they don't really want to sell now because they're not going to get the full price. If they can get some money now without having to pay the tax on it, and then benefit from some future growth, that really scratches an itch for many of those people and have to hold for another 3 to 5 years. And then for many of the investors, not only international, but also UK, who want to get into property, they particularly love the idea of getting some capital growth from property, but they don't want to have the hassle. They don't want to have the costs of getting into property. They don't want to have the time and energy of finding reliable people, because you do need to do your research. You do to find trusting people, and there are, like any industry, there are going to be some sharks out there. They don't have to go through all of that because we do a lot of that due diligence anyway. And then they can have this very much hands-free, very hassle-free, and I wouldn't say risk-free. I don't think there's anything such thing as a risk-free, but it's pretty much de-risked as much as we possibly can, and thus the returns, I think, are potentially significant given the relatively small risk. And that's my personal opinion, obviously, and we'll wait and see if people are interested in this or not.
Yeah. Michael says sounds exciting, especially on the Wealth Migrate platform. I know he lives in England. Johan de Toy said, what's the underlying structure for the loan to be created and issued to the landlord? And sorry, just before you answer that, one of the things I forgot to say earlier, we're trialing something. We've gone out to our inner circle and, our wealth hackers and our mastermind members. We said, hey, come and participate and let us know what you think. For the people that do fill in the survey, they'll be the first ones that get given the heads up to actually say when it's ready. I just want to be clear on that. And we'll give them a heads up and we'll give them first access before we go out to the whole network. Because I only went out to our inner circle with regards to this, just to test. And then, but yeah, it's an added advantage to filling in the survey. Back to Jan's question. What's the underlying structure for the loan to be created and issued to the landlord?
Okay, very, very simple. It's a loan to the individual, not to the company. That's important for a couple of reasons. If you lend to a company and the company goes bust, it's very hard for you to get your money back. If you lend to the individual, and as long as they've got assets, you could take to court and you could ultimately push them. When I say you, it would be Wealth Migrate. So Wealth Migrate is kind of a bit like an agent acting on behalf of all of its investors in exactly the same way. Crowd Property, and this has nothing to do with Crowd Property, but it's a similar concept in that Crowd Property is an agent that acts on behalf of all the lenders. And in the event of a problem, the lenders don't have to pursue the borrower. Crowd Property do that on behalf of all the lenders to try and get the best solution. Okay. So in the same way, what would actually happen is you would put your money into this particular project. Wealth Migrate would basically, they would have this loan agreement with the owner of the property. They'd hold it on behalf of all the investors, because you don't have hundreds or thousands of people having a loan agreement. Basically, it would be on behalf of the others in exactly the same way as they currently do on all their other investments. And then Wealth Migrate would also have this option. They would have the power of attorney on this property and the option to be able to buy it or assign it to someone else at the discounted rate, which more than compensates for the loan anyway. So all these insurances are in place, and Wealth Migrate would basically be the agent who would interact with the borrower, with the owner of the property. They would be sent the payment, and then they would distribute through their platform to all of the investors.
Cool.
So probably very similar, and I'm not 100% familiar with all the ways you operate, but I think it's probably very, very similar to what you currently do, Scott.
Yep. I am sure there's lots of questions coming through. I'm loving the interaction, by the way. Hope you don't mind, Simon. You're okay for time?
I'm okay for time. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Jan said, is an SPV created, pooling the money, which is then the lending entity? What is the SPV costs and other costs that should be accounted for? And lastly, assume the SPV is registered in the UK. So I can answer that. Yes, the SPV is registered in the UK. And again, all the modeling will be done with regards to when the deal structure is done in terms of the net returns and everything. Is that correct, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely. And also what you need to understand is this is the first time we've shared this with anyone. And we've thought it through pretty well. But actually, one of the benefits of having these questions and feedback is things, we didn't think about that. We didn't think about that. So we don't have and this is the first deal we're doing as well. So we don't have 100% of all the answers, I'm sure, but we're pretty smart between us and we've got a lot of experience in doing this kind of thing. We'll work it out to find a viable solution. This really was about, here's what we're going to do. And we are going to be doing this. And it's really about getting feedback from you. And do you love it? Do you hate it? What don't you like? What do you like? And it's all about getting, so really appreciate the feedback here. And Scott, I'd love to get a copy of the chat box later on if we can do that, to have a look at all of that. And also make sure you filled in that survey as well, because, this is going to be something we're going to offer to, certain people first of all, and then bring it out. But I think this first one and I'm vested interest personally, and also I want to make sure this works really well because I think this could be very big.
Yeah. Kevin says, sounds intriguing. Jose, lovely to see you again, Jose. It's been a while. You've asked a couple of questions and you then said down below, okay, Simon answered. So I don't actually know which one Simon answered. So I'm gonna go back to both questions because I don't know which one he answered. But he said, may have missed it, but are the properties in a separate structure or a single entity?
No, there's a company that Innis owns, and all the properties are owned in a company. But the loan is there's another thing I didn't finish answering. So one of the reasons you lend to the individual is because if there's a problem, you can then pursue the individual and their other assets. It's not limited to a company, which is you have a limited liability when you lend to a company, although you can have director guarantees. But also, if the money was lent to the company, to get it out of the company, Innis would have to pay tax on it. And the whole point is we're trying to do it so he doesn't have to pay tax. Yeah. So that's why you lend to that person, and then they can use the money without having to pay tax on it because it's a loan, it's debt.
Yeah. And then the second question Jose asked was, apologies, not the properties, the funding. So we've answered that around the SPV. Stella said, great opportunity to get a property investor. Kevin said, is the survey up? Yes, Kevin, it is up. I've just got it up. So just look for it. It's a poll on Zoom. Sometimes you got to click at the top and it's got Simon and I talking, and then there's another thing and you can click on the poll basically. Okay, Paula said, what if after the 3 years the owner doesn't want to sell?
Well, he doesn't want to sell. That's the whole point. And we're only working with people who want to sell. But in case he has a change of heart, there's an option agreement in place, which has a further year, by the way, to be exercised. And so he can't not sell. And again, you may or may not be familiar with options. It's a contract where there's exclusivity. He cannot sell to anyone else. If you want to buy or sell, he has to do that. So it's all secured through legal agreements done, obviously, through solicitors. Perfect.
Jose said, can you link the investment to a property or are you in a pool? So I think what he's trying to say is you've got the loan in the SPV. Is it linked to the property in case there's...
Yeah, absolutely. So the same way we do it at Crowd Property, each project, let's call this a project, will have a certain set of investors and they are investing in that project. So because they're going to get a share of that equity growth from that particular project. There will be other projects and they can just decide which projects they invest in and which they don't, or which they lend to. But yeah, it's specifically related to a particular project because you're going to share in the equity growth from that particular project.
Yeah. Vincent, what happens if Wealth Migrate go bust? That's a great question. I think just to answer that for any of our investments, the SPV is investing directly in the deal. It's completely separate from Wealth Migrate. Wealth Migrate helps you facilitate it, makes it easy, the money goes into your wallets, etc. We disappear, it doesn't change the investment at all. You still hold the investment, your capital is still safe, and you still would get your returns. The only difference would be Simon would have to say, okay, how are we going to pay people? And you'd have to pay it directly into a bank account, etc. But there'd be no risk to the investment.
And again, remember, there's nothing to do with Crowd Property, but in a similar way, part of the FCA requirements, because Crowd Property is FCA regulated, is FCA has a wind down policy. Crowd Property has a wind down policy. If something happens to the business that is Crowd Property, well, how are all those loans facilitated? There's a wind down policy and money put aside to cover the investment of someone just collecting in all the debts and paying back to all the original lenders. So that's a policy that's normally in place anyway.
Yeah. Derek said it's clear, keen to see it on the platform. Jay said, I hope I'm pronouncing that name right. I have to run. Thank you, Simon and Scott, for your time and presentation. Namusa said, can we have the survey up again? I haven't taken it down. I'll leave it up for the whole time. I will put a QR code. Let me get a QR code here. Okay, let me do this. I'll try and make life a bit easier. I won't leave it up forever, but there's your QR code that you can scan on your phone. And I'll also put this in the chat box just for some reason. Some people seem to be battling to find it. Let me just put this. Sorry, Simon, I'll come back to you now. I just want to put this in the chat box for everyone.
So, guys, I just want to I want to thank you for taking the time to hear about this, and I think Scott was quite keen to present a bit of an innovation to his team. He was always interested to see what's happening and being on the cutting edge of things, and it's great to have this opportunity. I presented this to you guys even before I presented anyone in the PIN network, but I think when we present this, I think there'll be lots of owners who want to come forward and do this. There'll be lots of our investors who want to do this, and we'll be funding them all through the Wealth Migrate platform to facilitate it.
Yeah, thanks. Arthur said, I'm modeling this side. What is the profit share on the equity growth above the GP, well, basically the pound 1.1 over 3-year gain, please?
40% of the equity growth. So what that means is if it's worth 1.2 at the moment, which is what we believe it's worth, we haven't had all the RICS valuation yet, but it's worth 1.2, even if it doesn't go up at all, which is unlikely, but anything's possible.
Oh, we lost you. Have you lost just Simon, or have you lost me as well?
Just Simon. We can hear. Oh, he's back.
Yeah. Simon, we just lost you. If you wouldn't mind just repeating what you said for the last 30 seconds.
Yeah, so it's 40% over and above the 1.1 million. Whatever it's sold for, it's 40% of that difference.
Trona says, is the building structurally sound? And again, that's what a RICS valuation will do to make sure that everything is in place. Again, think of it just like, as Simon's already said, if I'm borrowing money from Barclays Bank or Lloyds Bank, they would send in a RICS valuer. They would check out the quality of the property, and all of that, the valuation and everything before they'd lend money. It's the exact same process here in terms of it. It's probably one of the greatest benefits of investing in England is that you've actually got RICS valuers. By the way, you've also got them in Australia, being the Commonwealth country, but like in South Africa and America and whatever, it's a bunch of estate agents. So no disrespect to estate agents, but they're not the same. Okay, Derek said, am I correct? The option is set at £800,000.
Yes, the option is 800,000. So, and that only kicks in default if the owner is not returning the 300k back. The option kicks at 800,000, which is enough to clear the debt on the property, and whatever it's sold for over 800 would also go back to the investors. So as long as it's sold for 1.1, that would be enough to return all of 300,000 investments. So if it's sold for more than that, there'd obviously be a profit share after that. But it's very unlikely that's going to happen because the cash flow is coming out of the current rental income. And remember, the owner is getting the majority share of the uplift as well, and they want to get that. The reason they're doing this rather than just selling now is because they believe the value is going to go up. Myself and his think it's going to go up. So we want to get our share of the equity. If we didn't make the payments, we'd lose that right to get that benefit of the upside. So we've got skin in the game and commitment to make sure the payments are made to the investors, and then we all get paid out when the property is eventually sold.
Brilliant. Ricardo said, how is the investment going to be done through Wealth Migrate? Will there be a section for this investment? So yes, I mean, Ricardo, when the deal is ready, and again, Simon and I wanted to test the waters today, then the hard yards get done, the RICS valuation, everything, and it gets properly signed off. Then we'll let everyone know on the platform. But I will be clear that people filling in the survey will get, because I mean, this is the first that anyone's getting to hear about it. The people that are filling in the survey will get first access. Archie says, thanks, Scott and Simon. Very interesting concept. I know Archie knows a lot about property in England. So in terms of that process, what's the current net annual cash flow?
I think it's about 2.2 a month, 2,200 a month, I think, off the top of my head. I've got the figures, but I think it's something like that.
Okay, brilliant. And I think that
which is what you'd expect from single let properties.
Yeah. So do me a favor, if you haven't filled in the poll, please do. And I think we're probably coming to sort of wrapping up. I think we've got most of the things. Question, I know, Namusi, you're still struggling with the poll. I don't know what to do. Like literally, I've given you the link and there's the QR code. It's definitely still working because I can see people are filling it in as we speak. I'm not sure what else to say to you. What we will do though is that there were people, Simon, a number of people actually reached out to us and said, we'd love to be a car make it, will it be recorded? So I will follow up with a survey where if people have filled in the poll, you don't have to fill it in twice, but I will follow up with a survey afterwards where people can actually fill it in and participate. And
I'm happy for, as long as it only goes to Wealth Migrate clients, I'm happy for the recording to be released of this. But guys, you are the first to hear about this. It's kind of confidential, really, because I think this is going to be very, very popular, and we want to do it all through Wealth Migrate. So confidentiality would be appreciated, but I'm happy for people to watch the recording if you're Wealth Migrate connected.
Yeah, no, we'll put it. We'll just put it to the people who registered for the webinar and
Right.
the process. So, Simon, I think let's look to wrap up. What I'd like to sort of two things from my side. The first one is I just wanted to ask you, and I want to give you a little bit of time just to think about it quickly. But the last one would be for someone that's been advising, teaching. I mean, I know you run two incredible masterminds, and you help some of the top property investors in England. I'd love you to kind of finish off with what is your kind of key thoughts or takeaways or lessons that you should give to someone, just the pricey version for any investor. I'd love that as a wrap up. And then
you mean someone who wants to invest in the UK directly, or
so I think let's caveat it with let's ask a double-sided question. So the key thing for investing in the UK, and then just for investors, full stop. I mean, you've been helping more investors than almost anyone I ever know. So I'll give you a little time to think about that. And then just from my side, I just wanted to say, deep gratitude to you actually for allowing us to participate in this, to give us an early look in. Funny enough, I've been making 2 videos today, and it always talks about how people don't get access to these inner circle opportunities, and these are the type of deals that don't get put on, through the estate agents. People don't find out about it. And one of the things that I value most is that when our community and our investors get access to partners, get access to deals that aren't available elsewhere. And that for me really, really excites me. So I've got deep gratitude to you, which I want to thank you. I also want to thank who's here tonight, because this is something new and exciting and innovative. And we very much, Simon and I, are testing and saying, right, is there attraction for this? Yes or no? By the way, there's overwhelming attraction, Simon. Over 70% of people are interested, and the other 27 want more information. So there's one person that says no.
And by the way, I wouldn't expect anyone to make an investment on the brief details we provided. So this is just the concept with an example of a live case study. And obviously you need to do a lot more due. So that'll be one of my lessons. Whenever you make any investment, whether UK or overseas, you've got to do your due diligence. You've got to do your due. You've got to check the numbers. You've got to make sure. You've got to think about, what are your investing criteria? What do you want to achieve from your investments? And when you get clear on that, then when an opportunity comes to you, you can check, does it meet my requirements? If it does, great, I'm going to look into this and do some more research. If it doesn't meet my requirements, I need to move on to the next thing. Now, if you're doing no investing, maybe your criteria are unrealistic and you're not actually going to achieve what you're trying to achieve. But when you're clear on what makes a good deal for you, whatever that might be, it's going to empower you to move forward with confidence when you find something that meets you. So that would be the 2 of my lessons. Get clear on what works for you and always do your own due diligence. Now, obviously, Scott and I have known each other for a long time, and that's great, and that helps credibility-wise. I don't think Scott would just let anybody come and talk to his people. And so there's, and likewise, when we at Crowd Property put a deal on our platform, the investors know that the Crowd Property team have done a huge amount of due diligence and background work behind it. So they can just rely on that. Or we always say, but always do your own due diligence. You can go and check things. So, for example, we'll actually, when we release this, we'll show what are the actual rental income on the price. So you can go and do your research, say, oh yeah, that is the average rent in the area. And actually, I think some of our flats are slightly under rented because actually we've had some tenants there for a long time. Although we have moved the rents up, we've not pushed them up too much because we want to keep good tenants. But that's the kind of due diligence you can do. You're going to get to see the RICS valuation, which we'll share. Say, oh yeah, it's worth 1.2, or maybe even a bit more. And so you need to look for the evidence to back up what you're being told. No matter who is telling you, always do your own due diligence. Because when you're investing, you have to accept personal responsibility for your decisions. When you decide to do should be your responsibility. You can pat yourself on the back when it goes well. You need to wipe your tears when it doesn't go well. And look, sometimes things don't, particularly in property, by the way. If you're going to invest in property, it's not all roses and sunshine. Things go wrong. But you know what? For you to have more success, it's really smart to educate yourself. And it's really smart to work with other people who've gone the road. They've trodden the path before. They've stepped on the landmines. They've had the mistakes, so you don't have to make those mistakes. What would be foolish is to try and go and invest on your own. So the very fact you're part of this community, I know I'm talking to the I'm preaching to the converted here, because you understand the value of education, you understand the value of community, and you understand the trust you get in these kind of communities. But those would be my general advice about investing. I hope that makes sense, Scott.
Yeah, no, brilliant, Simon. And It's why I started off right in the beginning by talking about the partners and why it's so important in terms of that criteria. Just, I was going to wrap up, but there are two questions that come through which are important. So the one is, Arthur said the minimum IRR is 6%, but likely to be between 12.8 to 18.1, depending on equity growth, and capital gets repaid at the end of the term. Again, Arthur, obviously, once we've got all the finalized numbers, we'll do all the modeling in terms of it. Benno said, is there withholding tax on the interest earned?
So here's an interesting thing. If you lend to a company, that you should actually withhold some of that. But remember, you were lending to an individual here. So I don't think there's any tax need to retain. That's another benefit of lending to an individual. Otherwise, you do what's called a CT61 form. But if you lend to a company, you've got to actually, if you lend to his company, he'd have to retain some of the interest, send that to the tax man, and then issue you a tax receipt. Because people are all over the world in different tax structures, that's a complete nightmare. So it's much better we do it where you get the money, but then you would have to pay tax on your income. So the way this is structured, and we're checking this, our accountants, we don't believe there's any retained interest, but obviously you would need to pay tax in your jurisdiction on the interest that you earn, and obviously any capital growth as well.
Soraya said, thank you very much, Scott and Simon. Deidre said, looking forward to re-listening to the recording. Thanks for the opportunity. Michael gave you a thumbs up. And Derek said, finished with wise words, which I think is pretty much what you wrapped up with. Simon, I want to thank you for the opportunity. Thanks again for sharing. As always, it's a pleasure to bring you and share your knowledge with this community. And I look forward to getting involved in this deal and many more with you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, everyone. Wherever you are around the world, have a great evening. And as I always say, invest with knowledge, invest with skill. And look out for this coming soon on the Wealth Migrate platform. Thanks so much, guys.
There's one. Bye then.